Scan Pro Video brings you a series of webinars focusing on the latest Blackmagic design products and information.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate your time. I know that taking an hour or two out of your day in the middle of the week isn't always the easiest thing, so really appreciate you joining us for this. My name's Alistair Davidson. I am a master trainer for DaVinci Resolve, and today we're going to have a quick look at the key features of DaVinci Resolve 17. I know we're a little bit late to the party. 17's been out a while now, but there's still quite a lot of features that I don't get as much publicity as I think they should. And with Resolve being as expansive an application as it is these days, it can do pretty much everything we need to in a post-production workflow, from our ingest through to delivery, with the addition of the cut page, edit page, fusion for our VFX, color, which is where Resolve comes from, and Fairlight for our audio. With it being so expansive, it's always good to keep abreast of new features that come out with every version. So a little bit of housekeeping as we go through this. I know this is going to be a little bit longer than some of our previous webinars. There's a lot to cover off today, and I don't want to rush through too much of it. Everyone's going to be mute by default, but we will have some time at the end for a Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we run through this, feel free to put them in chat or save them up and put them in chat at the end of the webinar. And then when it comes to the end, I'll open up the chat window and go through everything there as well. It's just to try and keep us flowing without having to do too much stopping and starting. So with all of that said and out the way, I will start sharing my screen. So here we go. Got Resolve up here. I'll also open the chat window, and I'll just pop that over on another screen here, just so I can keep my eye on it as we go through everything. Okay. So let's dive in. I'm going to start on the color page in Resolve, because this is, like I said earlier, this is where Resolve came from. This is its background. So we'll start on the color page, because that's where a lot of people look for the new features, and then we'll have a look at some other pages as well. But there's been quite a lot done in the color page with the addition of 2 full new tool sets. So let's have a look at some of those, shall we? The first one I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at HDR, but I'm not actually going to open that palette yet, because I'm going to talk about our color wheels. And traditionally, when we've been grading in Resolve, we've had 2 sets of color wheels. We've had our primaries and our log wheels. And we've had our lift, gamma, gain, offset, those 4 wheels there. So lift is our shadows, gamma is our midtones, gain is our highlights, and then offset is our entire image. So if, in the past I've wanted to, brighten one part of the image, or if I wanted to push a color into one part of the image, I'm doing this on a grayscale right now so you can see exactly what's going on. So I've pushed some blue into my midtones there. You'll actually see that it doesn't just affect the midtones of this grayscale. It affects, quite a lot, all the way up to the sort of highlights and the shadows as well. If I push a lot more in there, you can see I'm really affecting the whole part of my image. With our log wheels, for example, we have slightly tighter control, and you can see what's going on in the parade over here on the right. So if I do that again, if I adjust my gamma, you can see I'm adjusting the highlights and the shadows. Same as if I adjust the highlights in primaries, I'm actually adjusting the shadows as well. With our log controls, we have a bit more control. So you see here, we've got a hard stop where I'm just affecting the highlights, where I'm just affecting the shadows, and then I'm affecting the midtones as well. And that's great for slightly more targeted adjustments. But if I now jump into our HDR tools, you'll see along the top here, I have several tools. I have all the way from black up to specular. So we have black, shadow, light, highlight, and specular. We also have global, which is kind of like our offset tool in the others. And these give us much more precise control over what we're doing. So we don't have, just one wheel or ball for our midtones, we've got, you know, a gradient almost here. So if I go to shadow and light, these are basically my midtones. If I push a bit of blue into the light, push the opposite of that, push some sort of orange red into the shadows, I could do the same in the highlights. Let's go for sort of magenta in the highlights, even up to specular. I might throw green in there. So you see that all these trackballs that we have are all these color wheels that we have. Again, I could do the same down here. They give us much more targeted regions of control. And we'll go through a couple of clips and why these are so helpful and so useful, as well as sort of covering off, you know, how to use them a little bit. So this is just a rough overview so you get the idea of how it works. So I'm going to jump into this next clip on my timeline here. And I'm going to do, you know, a very sort of quick grade on this clip. We've got, you know, some bushes and trees, grass in the foreground, mountains, and then our sky with some clouds over the top of it that we have here. If I go, generally when I'm grading, when I'm teaching grading and things like this, what I do is I always say, you know, set your black point first, set your black point and your white point and work on everything in between. But if I come all the way down to my HDR tools and go all the way down to black, which is the darkest part of my image, and I start adjusting it, nothing's happening. Absolutely nothing. And why is that? Well, if I, at the top, do you know what? Let me zoom in so you can see this. At the top right-hand corner of the wheels palette, I have this small icon here. And what does that do? That allows me to open up my zones. I can also close that over and you can switch between your zones and your wheels using the two buttons next to it. But I'm going to open both of them up so I can see both at the same time. And the zones are the range of tonality or the range of our image that these controls affect. So you'll see down the left-hand side here, I have my zones. I have black, dark, shadow, light, highlight, specular. I have my 6 zones there. And if I select any of these, you'll see it highlights one of these vertical lines. If I select black, which is what I was just adjusting, you'll see that no part of the image falls in this black zone. If I was to move that slightly further up and start adjusting my exposure, you can now see the effect happening on the RGB parade and in the sort of darker parts of the image up here. You can see that I'm now affecting more of that image. So really what we have, if I reset that now, is a lot more control. Like I said, we're able to do a lot more targeted adjustments with these HDR tools. So let's have a look. Instead of using the black control and changing the zones, I'm not going to dive into, you know, changing the zones and getting very particular with it. The last thing I'll sort of mention on there is that you can create new zones if you want. You can create multiple zones to really sort of get into fine adjustments. But we're just going to stick with the 6 that we have by default. So I'll go back to what I was saying before. I'll set my my black point. So using the dark wheel here, what you'll notice is, unlike previously where we have, if we look at our primers wheels, where we have a master slider underneath, both log and primer, we have a master slider that affects our Y, RGB channels together. We have the trackball, which is similar, and we also have this exposure slider here as well. And the exposure slider is what I'm using to pull that tonality down. So if I pull the dark parts of my image down, if I come up to the specular highlights now, so in the clouds, if I zoom in, you'll see there's not a lot of definition up here where the clouds meet the sky. So I might actually increase my specular exposure there just to try and create a bit of definition. And then under highlights, I'll actually pull that down. So I'm creating contrast now in just the top part of my image here. Again, I'm not having to use secondary corrections or anything like that to do this. I'm doing it all from these color wheels. So I've made a bit of contrast there in the highlights. What else can we do? I might want to try and create some separation actually of the foreground and the sky here. Well, how can I do that? And how can I know exactly what it is I'm adjusting? So I've adjusted my dark, which is the really darkest parts, the shadows around here. I've adjusted the specular and highlight part of the sky up here. If I want to adjust the sort of mid-tone range, it's either going to be my shadows or my highlights. And how do I know which is the right one to use? Well, I have above the color wheels, you'll see I've got two controls in either corner. I have my reset, so that resets all the controls for that wheel. But I also have this small icon in the top left-hand corner here. And if I click and hold on that, it actually shows me the part of the image that I'm going to be affecting. And once I've adjusted or selected a different part of the clip, I can then turn on my highlight option in the top left-hand corner of the viewer, that sort of magic wand there, or by using Shift H on the keyboard. So if I adjust the exposure here of the shadow, I pull that down a little bit and hit Shift H, you can see I'm actually starting to adjust everything that's not grayed out. Now, the problem with that is I'm actually adjusting a little bit of the sky. So again, if I use my zone, if I change the range of my zone using that slider here, just pull that down so I'm not selecting the sky at all. Any correction I make now is just applying to that sort of tight zone there. So I'm going to pull that down, really sort of darken that down a bit. And I'm going to do the opposite with the light. I'm actually going to brighten that up a bit. And again, create that sort of contrast between the foreground and the background. If I want to as well, I can come over to my my global control here, and you'll see that we have a global saturation slider. So instead of having our saturation down here amongst our quick controls, it's up here underneath the global wheel. Now, something that might catch one or two people out, because it caught me out the first time I was looking at this, is if I come up to the top part of my, I'll close the zones there. If I come up to the top right-hand corner of my HDR tools, I get this little 3-dot menu, and you'll see this throughout Resolve in lots of different places. But the 3-dot menu is basically additional controls for whatever tool palette it is that I'm looking at. So what I'm looking at here is the additional controls for my HDR tools. And one of these is Bank Global with Color Wheels. So right now, if I move up and down using the arrows or the wheels at the top here, you'll see that global always stays there. I can turn that off so that now I get my 4 controls and global's all the way along at the end. But it depends how you want to work. I tend to like having global as a as its own sort of wheel there, and then banking between the rest of them. So what I'll do is I'll just increase the global saturation, so the saturation for all of the zones, just a little bit, and I might even push it towards blue just to cool the image off just a tiny bit. And now if I enable and disable that clip, you'll see I was actually able to do quite a quick and quite a nice sort of grade with very little work. I didn't have to go in and do masking, power windows, tracking. I didn't have to use a qualifier for any of that. I just used the HDR tools to highlight specific zones of my image and then work on them straight away. And where this becomes, really powerful, or another way where you can use it, is fixing incorrect exposure. So if I come along to the third clip in my timeline here, you'll see that our cameraman has exposed for outside pretty much. Outside we've got, we can see the cars, we can see the car park quite nicely, but inside the shop, it's very dark, very difficult to see what's going on. Well, I know that I can fix this now really, really easily using my HDR tools. So if I come along to my specular and highlight wheels, I'll do the same thing I've been doing so far. I'll pull my specular highlights down a little bit, pull my normal highlights down as well. And just in that adjustment, hopefully this is coming across in Zoom. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see the adjustment that I've made already in that window. And now I can do the opposite. So I've pulled down my highlights. I might actually now want to pull up my shadows. So if I go in there, pull shadows up, I might even pull the dark parts of the image up just a little bit because I don't want to crush the blacks in there. Just pushing that up just to get to the point where if I go too far, obviously I start to lose contrast. We get very sort of washed out, milky, gray parts of the area. It's not what I'm looking for. Just raise it to a reasonable level in there. And now you can see the sort of before and after what we had before where the shop is so dark. Really easy to go in, select just the shadows or the dark parts of the image and raise those up as well. What you might notice is I mentioned that we have the saturation slider underneath the global control, which is the saturation for the full image, but we also have saturation for these zones as well. So for example, in the darker parts of my image here, this bench and on top of the laptop, even though it's quite dark, they're quite saturated. So if I wanted to pull a little bit of color out of them, I could easily just use the saturation slider in there to do so, whilst leaving, you know, my midtones and my highlights, you know, as saturated as they are to begin with, or I could even push more saturation into them using their specific saturation control as well. So again, really good for fixing things like incorrect exposure. If we've exposed for one part of the image, we can actually start to isolate and correct that very, very easily. So the global control, I've talked about it so far. I'm going to jump along to clip 4 here. I've talked about it in terms of functioning kind of like offset. And there's a reason I say kind of like offset. Yes, it affects my image as a whole, but it doesn't function exactly the same. So it is slightly differently. And to show this off, I'll actually jump back to my primary wheels here. And I'm going to look at my temperature slider. So if we wanted to adjust the color temperature of our shot, if I go too cold or if I go too warm, it no longer looks natural. It looks as though we're just putting a red wash or a blue wash over our image there. And it's not very pleasing. Generally, when I'm, you know, if I'm using those tools, or if I have been using those tools in previous versions of Resolve, it's very much a less is more type scenario. But if I come across to the HDR wheels again, and now I have temperature and tint either side of my wheels here. I also have them in the bottom left here. You'll see that as I move that up, it's a much subtler, you know, I can go to the max and minimum, and it's a much subtler change that we're making. So why is this? Well, it all comes down, excuse me, it all comes down to a change in the color management within Resolve. So if I, I'll close that and I'll do that again. If I come down to the project settings here and go to color management, Blackmagic have updated the DaVinci Resolve YRGB color managed workflow. And I'll go through what we're sort of looking at here. So generally the way that the color managed workflow works is we have an input color space. So we're telling Resolve what color space our source files are in. We convert it to this timeline color space, and that's how our tools feel, how they react, the space that they work in. And then it's converted to our output color space. So this is what we want to deliver in. So I have this set to Rec 709 just now. Say I'm delivering for broadcast or for the web, that's fine. You'll notice that my input color space is also set to Rec 709, but on the timeline, I have raw clips. So I have Blackmagic raw, and I even have some R3D raw files in there. If you're working with raw clips, the input color space setting is ignored. Resolve uses metadata from the raw clips on the timeline and applies the transform based on that metadata rather than based on the input color space setting here. If I have clips, you know, like H.264, H.265, you know, ProRes or something like that doesn't have that metadata in it for whatever reason, then it will use this input color space option here. But the big change is this one, the timeline color space option that we have set to DaVinci wide gamut, and it's using, you'll notice it also mentions the gamma curve afterwards, so it's Rec 709 is the space with the gamma of 2.4. We're using the DaVinci WG or wide gamut with the DaVinci intermediate curve. Now, I'm not going to get too heavy on the color science part of it. If you are interested in the DaVinci wide gamut and intermediate EOTF or electro-optical transfer function, then what I'd recommend is actually watching the HDR webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago, because in that we dive into the wide gamut and the EOTF and how they work. And how they're sort of set up. But the idea is we're working in an absolutely enormous color space. So when they call it a wide gamut, it is huge. And that gives us a lot more control with our tools because we have such a range in there. We have finer control with our tools. And because of the wider space and the finer control, it also makes it easier to translate those tools across clips from different cameras. So, you know, we'd all love to work on footage that had been shot in the perfect conditions, you know. Every camera setting has been set correctly. They're all from the same camera with the same settings. We have to do very little balancing between them. That's the ideal scenario, but it's not the realistic scenario in many cases. Even in this timeline here, we have a mixture of, you know, R3D files and Blackmagic raw files. So it's common for us to work across multiple clips. And we need to, in the past, we've needed to balance these manually. And if we've applied a change to, or if we've applied a correction to a Blackmagic raw clip, and we've just copied it across to a red clip, it's not going to look correct. It's not going to translate properly. And this is where the wide gamut and the new color management sort of workflow steps in and does a really good job of translating this. So the big part of how we are mapping source color spaces or clips from a camera into DaVinci or into the DaVinci wide gamut is down to what's called the DRT, or the display render transform, not to be confused with another feature they added in Resolve 17, which is the DaVinci Resolve timeline. When we're talking about color space transforms, we're talking about the display render transform. And this DaVinci setting, this is the only one we're going to look at. There are other options in here if we just wanted to, you know, do luminance mapping or saturation preserving. There's a lot of control and flexibility that you have there, but we're not going to go through all of it. The DaVinci setting, which is the default really, and it's what we're using. This does a luminance roll off. So when we're doing the transform to say Rec 709 or Blackmagic Raw to DaVinci wide gamut, it does a roll off in the shadows and highlights when it's doing that mapping. So it's not like a harsh clipping or anything like that. It does the transform and it does a smooth roll off. And it also does what's called controlled desaturation when you get to the brightest and darkest parts of the image as well. So what does all of that mean? What does it translate to? I know I've sort of bombarded you with a lot of sort of technical talk there, but what does it mean? What does it mean in practice? Well, what it means is as I'm going through and I'm adjusting my temperature and tint controls, or I'm adjusting anything within, you know, the global controls here, it should be leaving the darkest parts and the brightest parts of my image pretty much alone. So I'll jump back to my grayscale for this. If in my grayscale I push, you know, all the way down, if I make it a lot colder, I make it a lot warmer, you'll see that I'm affecting, you know, the majority of the image. But as we get down to the shadows, as we get up to the highlights, you see that sort of fall off, which just gives it a more sort of natural feel and just a bit of a better control all around, rather than having a sort of color cast over the whole image like we had when we were using temperature and tint in our previous controls. You can see if I push that all the way towards red there, our highlights are yellow at this point. We don't have that with the global controls in the offset tool. And that's handy to know. Like I said, it can lead to correcting a bit quicker, and it can also lead to making looks a lot quicker as well. So if I come across to this fifth clip in my timeline, I'm going to try and build a really quick teal and orange look. And I'm going to bring up my vector scope just to do this. I have my skin tone line here. Again, I can turn that on or off in the scope settings, that skin tone indicator there. And I'm going to make a really sort of quick teal and orange. So I'm going to use an offset there. I don't want to do that. I want to be in my HDR tools. Thank you very much. So I come across my HDR tools and I go to global, and I'll just pull that down towards cyan a little bit. So I'm pushing most of my image down towards cyan. And if I come across to my light wheel here, I'll push a little bit of red back in to sort of preserve those skin tones if I can. So I'm getting a nice sort of almost sci-fi blockbustery type look there. I might even increase the contrast using that slider down there. And I've built a really quick look using those controls there. So I've not balanced it. I've not bothered about, my white point or black point. I've just used this to build a creative look. And you can see as I enable and disable that, how quick that was for me to do. And I talked before about copying it to other clips. So if I come across to the next clip in my timeline, which handily happens to be our R3D, our red file, and I use my middle mouse button and click on the Blackmagic raw clip just to copy across my grade, you'll see that actually it's done quite a good job of translating that look. Now, it's never going to be sort of perfect off the bat when we're sort of copying to different clips. So I can go in and I can give, whoops, didn't mean to reset that. I can go in and I can give it a little bit of a tweak, but it doesn't need that much. It doesn't need that much. As I jump between these two clips, I might even have gone a little bit too far there. If I jump between these clips, it's a lot closer of a starting place. If I was working in Resolve 16 or an earlier version, and I was trying to sort of copy grades between different cameras, different color spaces, the tools, I'd have to, do a lot more to get them to the same sort of starting point. So really that level of control we have and the ability to have that sort of uniformity when we're doing grading. So it doesn't change how we grade depending on the source clip. Having that uniformity just makes everything a little bit quicker for us as well there. So the last thing I'll show off with the HDR wheels here, I realize that I've spent, almost 20 minutes on just the HDR wheels, and we've got a lot more to get through. But the last thing we'll look at is this clip in my timeline here. And we're going to do something similar to what we did in the shop here. We're actually just going to use it to set the exposure correctly. So I said before, previously when I've taught grading or been grading myself, I generally start with setting my black point. Well, with the HDR tools, if I was going to do that, if you remember rightly, my black point, depending on my source clip, there might be actually no part of the image that falls within that. So that doesn't work for me. So where do we start with this? Well, generally start with shadow and light. So that's your sort of mid-tone crossover point here. So if I start by pulling my shadows down just a little bit, if I pull them down, more of the image will now start to fall into, say, my my dark range here. So I can start to pull the darkest parts of the image down, and so I might pull light down just a touch, and then I can start to work on the different wheels as well from here. So going along to highlight and specular to try and bring back as much as I can of the sky. It has been clipped, so if I try and pull that down too much, it's just going to go grey rather than white. So it has clipped in camera. We can't recover everything, but we can stop it being overexposed by adjusting each of these sort of tonal ranges quite accurately. And again, we've gone from an overexposed image where even our shadows are starting to get a little bit washed out. You can see on the scopes how raised our black point is, just by using those HDR tools there, we've been able to get quite a quick balance done on that clip. So there we go. Those are the HDR tools. A lot to take in. Got a lot more because there are a lot of features we're going to get through here today. Next one in the color page is the color warper. So this is quite an interesting tool as far as I'm concerned, and it has two operating modes. If I come along to the next clip of my timeline, it has two operating modes. For those that may have missed that, the color warper is now next to the custom curves tool. So it's just this sort of almost like spider web icon there. So it's got two operating modes. Those are Hue Saturation and Chroma Luma. What does that mean? Well, we'll dive into it and we'll have a look at them both separately. So the first one we'll start with is Hue Saturation. So I have my sort of spider web graph down here. And what does it do? Well, if I hover over any part of the image, you'll see as soon as I'm in the color warper tool and I move my mouse over the viewer, you'll see I get that small eyedropper, that pipette icon. And as I move around different parts of the image, what you'll notice is different points on this web actually start to light up as I hover over them. So if I go over the grass, it's this sort of orange or yellowy green point that highlights there. And now if I click and drag on that, if I drag, a point away from the center, so our center, if we consider that 0 saturation, if I click and drag that away from the center, it's going to get more saturated. We're going to add more saturation to it. If I move it around, if I pull it up, pull it down, move it around the center point, we're then changing the hue as well. So I could really quickly go in and just start pulling out, this grass here. It's a bit yellowy. I might want that really sort of cartoon green oversaturated grass look. So I'll do that. And there we go. If I just enable and disable that, done incredibly quickly. If I want to know, it can be a bit of a pain, especially as we start adding granularity to this, as we start adding more points, and we'll look at that in a second. It can be a bit of a pain to try and figure out where you are on the graph all the time. So if I hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, or Option if you're on a Mac, hold down your Alt or Option key and then click and drag, or just click, it'll show you which part of the image you are going to be working on. So if I click the grass, I can see that I'm actually getting the grass, and I'm also getting some of the hedge and some of these trees behind it as well. So that is the Hue Saturation Mode. We'll have another look at this because I mentioned granularity there, and it's kind of important. If I come along to this clip here, we've got a model. It could be a fashion shoot, it could be anything else. Whatever it is, we've been asked to make the red of her dress slightly more saturated. The problem I'm going to hit with this is if I click and drag on her dress, it's very close in terms of hue and saturation to her skin tone. So I'm not just affecting the dress now, I'm affecting her skin tone and even this sort of section in the back. And that's not what I want. So I can add more control points into this graph to give me finer control. And I do that down here in the bottom left-hand corner of the color warper window. So if I click on that, you'll see I can add, right now we have 6 control points, both 6 lines coming out from the center, and on each line we have 6 points on it. So that's what these 2 separate options are here. I can set that to 16. And you'll see that they're linked. I could unlink them if I wanted, less points on each line. I could add more points, The control you have with sort of every tool set in Resolve is incredible at times. But I'm going to set that to 16 for just now. And now if I zoom in a little bit, just to make sure, and now just select that point, you'll see because I'm now no longer dragging a larger part of the graph around, I'm only dealing with this fine control line here, I'm able to just sort of isolate her dress quite easily. So I'll zoom out a little bit and do that again. See, I can just really get very precise with that however I want to do it. So there we go. Again, I'll enable and disable it so you can see it. I'm hoping this is coming through on Zoom. You can see that getting saturated and less saturated as I enable and disable that node. So that is our hue saturation mode for this slider. We do have another, and I mentioned it earlier, and that is the Chroma Luma mode or working mode for the color warper. And you switch between them in these boxes up here on the top right of the palette. So this is it. This is my Chroma Luma, and you'll see that I've got two grids for this. So we have our chroma, so our color left to right here, so on our yellow-blue axis, and then our green-magenta axis. And up, or sort of vertically, we have our white point at the top and our black point at the bottom. So say I wanted to make my sky slightly more blue. Well, I can just click and drag in the sky. I want to make it bluer and brighter. See, I can drag towards the blue axis, and I can drag up to make it brighter as well. I can drag towards blue, but make it darker. Again, I'm being very drastic with it here, just to show you, you know, what it does effectively. I'll undo that because the big problem I have, yet again, is granularity. I'm adjusting so much of the image that I don't want to, especially when I'm dealing with things like, you know, the sky where it's overcast and the clouds. It's very difficult to get in those sorts of areas or those gradients. It's very difficult to be precise, especially when we're not using the most precise graph that we can. So I'll do the same thing. I'll set both of them to 16. And now, I mean, again, I can click and drag, but rather than doing that, again, if I click and drag, I'm still dragging a lot of points with it to the point where, you know, the car's still being affected, you know, a lot of the clouds are still being affected. So undo all that. If I just click once somewhere, you know, I've picked my clouds, I've just clicked, you'll see it's highlighted this one dot for me. This is the one point that really I'm looking to move. So if I want to just move that, how do I go about it without affecting the rest of my mesh here? Well, the easiest way is actually using the tools over here on the right-hand side. There's a ton of different tools here, and I'm not going to get into all of them. I'm just going to go through a few of them. First one is this one. It's invert selection. I'll zoom in there. It looks like that. Two arrows sort of pointing around in a circle. If I click on that, I've now selected every point but that original one. And my option, my tool next to invert selection, if I hover over that, is convert selected to pin. So if I click on that, it now pins all of those points for me. So what that means is if I start moving my original point, it doesn't move the rest of them. So I have that finer control in there. I can actually go towards that sort of bluer, brighter sky there. And again, as always, I could push it too far. And when I do, I start to get these harsh lines and edges around the edge of the clouds where those gradients are. And this is where I can start to use feathering controls just to sort of smooth out that gradient. And we get them down here in the color warper. So at the bottom where we have Chroma and Luma, you'll see that I have resets for both of them, but I also have a smoothing control. So if I click on that, it just gently starts to nudge this point back to its original position to smooth out those harsh edges that we've created there. So that's the color warper, a very quick tour of the color warper. Again, there's so much to cover. We're not diving super in depth with a lot of this. And I'm going to come along to something that I just can't stop using. I think it's incredible. And it's based on the neural engine, the DaVinci Resolve neural engine, and it's called the Magic Mask tool. So it's this option here next to our normal tracker. We have this small sort of silhouette in a square box here. Sorry, give me a second to have a drink. Sorry about that. I'm only 40 minutes in and my voice is starting to go. That's fantastic. So what does the Magic Mask do? Well, I'll show you. The Magic Mask allows me to draw on any person because it's designed to track and mask people. So I've drawn a small, it doesn't have to be anything bigger than that. I've drawn a small line on our bride in this shot. And if I now come along to the top right-hand corner of the Magic Mask controls, you'll see I have this toggle mask overlay button. If I turn that on, Resolve, through its neural engine, has already analyzed this clip, analyzed the bit that I've highlighted, and found a person in there, and it's masked it for me. So now if I track this, if I track forward, it's already tracked that mask to her. I can go in and I can refine this using all the settings that we have down here. Some of these will be familiar to us if we're, working with the qualifier, for example, things like clean black, clean white. We have this smart refine option. We have a faster if we want to try and, just get it done quite quickly. We're not too worried about the quality, and we have a better option. I'm going to just set it to better and use smart refine just to sort of tidy up the edges. I might even add a little bit of blur, probably a bit too much on the smart refine I've done there. Then just a little bit more blur around the edges there. So Resolve's already analyzed this clip. It's found the person in it that I wanted it to find, and it's masked them. So what does that allow me to do? Well, it allows me to adjust just that person now. So you'll see I'm working in highlight there. If I wanted to just brighten her up a little bit, in my HDR tools here, I'm using the global exposure. I could go into, my primaries wheels, and I could use gamma to brighten her up. You can basically, once you've masked the person, you can go in and start to use all your tools. It's a much quicker way of isolating people in a scene than we previously had, where we had to draw masks, we had to rotoscope, we had to do a lot of manual tracking. It was a time-consuming process. So the Magic Mask tool pretty much does all this for me automatically. So if I'll brighten her up a little bit to make her stand out from the background, might even add a little bit of contrast, possibly too bright. If I pull her down a little bit, and then a little bit of saturation in there as well. And now if I add what's called an outside node, so here we go, I'll show my mask overlay again. I'm affecting everything that is selected in this red area. I can add what's called an outside node. If I right click on this node and go to add node, add outside, or I can use Alt and O or Option and O if you're on a Mac to add an outside node. And that outside node basically takes everything outside of the mask in the first node and starts working on it. So I turn that off. I can now do something like apply a blur to this clip, and you'll see really easily, I've isolated her in that first node. I've made her slightly brighter and added some saturation. I've then added an outside node and added the blur to that to sort of blur the bridesmaids in the background. Again, I'm doing everything a bit over the top here, just so that you can see what I'm doing as it comes through. And there you go, really quickly, really easily isolating subjects within our clips. And I've used that tool so many times now, it's not even funny, because it makes this sort of work where you want to adjust one person so much easier. The one thing to be aware of is, because it uses the neural engine, Resolve sort of AI functionality, it is quite power hungry. So it's all GPU based image processing, and if you don't happen to have a very powerful graphics card or a slightly older graphics card, it might take a little bit of time for you to actually run that processing. So it's just something to be aware of. Generally, a lot of the neural engine tools tend to be a little bit resource hungry at times, but as long as you know about it, and you're not sort of trying to track straight away and you're not getting instant results and you're worrying why, you'll be fine. So we'll do a little bit of a quick fire sort of push through the color page now, because we've already covered, or we've only covered sort of 3 tools, but there's a lot more to get through, but we don't need to go into as much depth as them. One of the things, if I come along to this clip here again, it's a duplicate of a clip we were working on earlier. But one thing we had in Resolve in previous versions was the ability to have multiple playheads. So if I come up to the color drop-down menu here and go to active playhead, you'll see currently I have one playhead, playhead A. If I click on playhead B, on my little timeline here now, you'll see I have an A playhead and a B playhead. And we've had this for a while in Resolve. We've had the ability to have multiple playheads. I might even add a third. Why not? Active playhead, playhead C. There we go. We've had the ability to have multiple playheads that we can jump between in Resolve for a while. But what's new in Resolve 17 is that we can actually use these playheads to compare clips using the split screen function. So in the top left-hand corner of the viewer, we have three buttons. We have the image wipe for things that we have in the gallery. We have the highlight mode, which we looked at earlier, where we're looking at a range that we've selected. And the one in the middle, the sort of grid layout, is our split screen. If I click on that, in the top right-hand corner, I now have a drop-down menu. So, previously we had options like versions, selected clips. So if I selected, select a couple of clips here, go to selected clips, I'm able to view those clips. But now in Resolve 17, if we have active playheads or multiple active playheads, we can use those to compare clips as well. So if we're trying to balance some cameras or tweak a look across, a couple of different shots, we can use active playheads to do that as well. So I'll just reset those. I only need one playhead for the rest of the demo, and I'll turn split screen off just now. Something else that we've had added in Resolve 17 is a new curve, which is the saturation versus luminance curve, or sat versus luma curve. And what this allows us to do is adjust the luminance of a specific saturation level within our clip. So, for example, if I take this gentleman's shirt here, I'm just going to click using the little eyedropper icon. You'll see it's placed a little point for me on my graph here. And now I can raise or lower the brightness, the luma, of that specific saturation. Now, because I've not got any control points in here, I'm affecting a lot of the image, so I can actually just bring that down, be quite strict with the area that I'm affecting. You can see now it's pretty much just his shoulders that I'm making brighter or darker. But I'm going to do the reverse of that. I want to keep his shirt at the same sort of level of brightness, but I actually want to pull down pretty much the rest of the clip. So if I click on his shirt there to place a little control point, come along to the end, you'll see I can now start to pull the sort of background, those sort of areas of lower saturation already, start to make them a bit darker. Again, I could be very drastic with it, but I might just pull it down just a little bit. I might even pull that out just to get a little bit of a softer roll off. So there we go, the saturation luminance control. Handy for very sort of quick adjustments. What else do we have? We actually have an improvement, not a massive improvement, but an improvement to the Bezier tool if we're drawing windows. So in previous versions of Resolve, if I was drawing a window, every time I placed a point, I would then have a line connecting that point and my mouse wherever I was going on the screen. I don't have that now, so I can actually just go in and freely place points. And this is a bit of improvement just because it allows me to see more of the image as I'm placing points. Before, if I'd placed that point and I moved my mouse over here, I'd have a big white line connecting my mouse and that point. And I don't want that. I want to be able to see a bit more of my image. So that's a nice little improvement there. Again, not a super fancy improvement, nothing that's going to make you go, wow, like the magic mask, just little usability improvements. What else do we have? We have additional effects as well. So if I come back to this clip, for example, this sort of overexposed clip, I'll reset my grade on that. This clip where it's overexposed, we have new effects, one of which is false color. So I can actually drag and drop this false color effect up here, which I can find under my open effects library. I can drag and drop that onto my clip. And we've got now a scale on the left-hand side here. And we've got the false color overlay like you'd see on, a cine camera or, a field monitor. If you have, like a video assist or something like that, you have this false color functionality in there. So we can apply this in Resolve and we can actually use this to grade with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set a camera model. So it's set it as Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K here. But this clip was shot on a pocket camera 4K. There we go. And from this, I can see roughly, I know that my skin tone should line up on this sort of 50%, this sort of pinkish area here. Well, I can see her eyebrows are, you know, her face, her hair, a lot of it's overexposed here. So if I just actually use my global control there, that's decided it's not going to do anything for me for some reason. That's not great. Let me have a look at why that is. Ah, I know why that is. It's because I deleted my first node. So if I put a node before that, thank you very much. There we go. Put a node before that. And now I do the same. It's basically the plugin's updating of the information it's being fed from the node beforehand. So actually, if I applied a color grade on there, you'll see that it's just brightening and darkening the plugin itself. So there you go. Everyone makes mistakes. Always handy to make sure you're on the correct node. So there we go. I've applied my false color OFX clip there, and I'm actually just pulling down the highlight. I've done it again. There we go. I'm on the wrong node. So there we go. Back to my first node, and I'll pull my highlights down just so that her skin tones are sitting around that sort of 50% mark there. And now I could turn this off if I wanted. And now if I enable and disable this node, you can see it's a handy guide for how we're exposing our image to start with. So all these little tools in here, you know, if something hasn't been exposed correctly on set, all these little tools that we have in Resolve make it very easy for us to clean these up in post. Last thing for the color page is LUT files. So previously, previous versions of Resolve, for lookup tables, we've always had to go to our project settings, color management, and then if we wanted to find our LUT folder, we have it down here, open LUT folder. And it's opened it on another screen for me. In here, we have all of our lookup tables that are stored in a hidden folder, so program data, whatever it is. This is where our LUTs have been stored in the past, but we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to follow that sort of workflow. We can actually point Resolve to any folder for lookup tables. And the way we do that is if I come up to the preferences within Resolve, so DaVinci Resolve in the top left, preferences, or I can use Control, comma, or Command, comma if you're on a Mac. And then where is it stored? It is under System General. You'll now see I have a LUT locations option here, very similar to like media storage if you're adding drives or anything like that. Under General, I can actually just point Resolve to different folder locations. So I could have my LUTs stored wherever I want. They don't have to be in that very specific folder anymore. So that's quite handy, especially if you're moving between systems or anything like that, and you've got LUTs that you take with you a lot. You can just keep them in a folder, put them on an external hard drive, or just drag them onto the desktop. And then when you start a project, you start working in Resolve, just link it to that new LUT folder there. Cool. So that's very quickly some new features in the color page. Let's jump across to the edit page and let's have a look at a different timeline. So I'm going to look for, here we go, portrait. So with the rise of social media, vertical video, all this sort of thing, it's very common for us to end up with a scenario like this where we're editing a portrait timeline, but our footage might not have been shot that way. So this first clip here, if I actually come up to the inspector, you see someone's already done a zoom on this for me. So if I undo that, you'll see it was shot landscape, but it's been zoomed into after the fact. The big problem we have with this is that because it was shot landscape, it's not centered on these two individuals. And to center it would be quite a lot of work. We'd have to go in, we'd have to keyframe it and make sure that they stay in the middle of the frame and we're not getting scenarios like we have back here where, you know, our male model is pretty much cut out of the frame almost entirely. So it's a lot of work to manually do that. But Resolve has now taken all that work out of the workflow for us, really, by adding what's called Smart Reframe. So up here in the inspector, underneath the transform controls, you'll see I have this Smart Reframe bunch of settings here. And again, this uses the neural engine. And again, like the Magic Mask, by using the auto setting, it's looking for people. So if I leave this on auto and I hit reframe, what Resolve's going to do for me is it's going to analyze the clip, it's going to look for people, and it's already applied. You can see up here in the inspector, it's already applied position keyframes for me. So that it keeps these two in the middle of the frame. If I play through this now, at no point should either of them drift off the edge of the frame. Resolve's gone through, analysed the clips, analysed where our talent stays within the frame, and then keyframed the position of that clip for us. And if I want, I could even open up and show, so open up the curve editor, for example, and show the X position, and you'll see all the different keyframes it's put in there for us to keep them in the center of the frame. Now, you can see how many keyframes it's put in to do that smooth a job. Doing that manually is just a bit of a nightmare, really. So again, time saving and a really powerful feature, especially, like I said, with the rise of sort of video content for mobile phones. It takes a lot of hassle out of the workflow for us. The thing is, if we come to our next shot here, it's looking for people. So if I hit auto here, you know, when the car brakes and goes out of the frame, it's not really going to know what it's looking for to try and keep the car in the center of the frame. So what I can do is I can select my clip, and instead of using the auto option in Smart Reframe, I can come down to reference point, and you'll see as soon as I've done that, it's switched the viewer over to Smart Reframe, and it's given me this window here, the small mask here, that I can just resize and reposition. I'm going to put it over the tail light of that car, that Aston Martin, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hit reframe. So what Resolve will do now is going to take that point that I masked and try and keep it in the center of the frame. So I'll turn that viewer overlay off. If I hit play now, the tail light, even when the car brakes at the end and before we saw it shoot all the way back off, even when it brakes, it keeps it in the center of the frame for us. So again, really, really powerful tool, especially if you're doing a lot of content for the web or content for mobile platforms. What else do we have in the edit page? We have, oh, this is a good one. So sync multicam. Do you know what? I'm actually going to dim this because this could be a little bit loud. I will warn you in advance. Your speakers and headphones, if you're listening on them, aren't broken. Some of these tracks do clip. So if you do hear a little bit of distortion, it's not on your end, it is with these tracks. But I have here basically a multicam clip set out for me, where we've basically just laid out lots of different angles on top of each other. If I, was to disable these, you'd see all the different angles that we have here, all laid out on top of each other. But if I hit play, we've got a ton of different tracks that are all out of sync with each other. So we've thrown them all on the timeline. They all start at the front of their clips, but they are way out of sync with each other. So traditionally, this would have been a bit of a pain, to go through and line all these up manually. But what we've got now is an automatic tool within Resolve. So if I don't want to click on that, if I select all my clips, what it's worth noting is, to do this, you can only select one clip per track. So you'll notice I've not selected these two at the end here, and I'll come back to them in a minute. But I'm selecting one clip per track here. And if I just right click, you'll see I have auto align clips here. If I selected all my clips and did it, auto align doesn't show up. So this is why I'm saying it's got to be one clip per track, right click, and then auto align clips based on timecode or waveform. So if our clips have matching timecode, Resolve will, the way that it works is it looks at the clip on track 1. So it'll look at the time code on track 1, and then it'll align all the other clips based on time code to track 1. If we choose to do it by waveform, you'll see that all of our clips here have audio with them. Resolve will analyze the waveform of clip or track 1, then analyze the waveforms of all the other clips on the timeline and find out where they sync up with that first track. So let's do that. Let's select all those clips, right click, auto align clips. I'm going to do it based on waveform. Hit that, Resolve's done our sync for us. So now, if I jump back to the little bit before the beginning here, as soon as we hit sort of here, we don't have all the tracks starting at different times or anything like that. They're all perfectly in sync. If I wanted to do the same thing, because if you remember rightly, these clips at the end didn't get synced because they're from the same camera, but someone's obviously hit stop and then start again on the recording. Once we get to here, because they haven't been synced, they are going to be out of sync. So if I hit play, I don't know if you can hear that, but if I solo that track, it has her singing in it, but it's not in sync with the rest of the video. So I just do the same thing. I select all the clips and said this time I miss out the front ones, right click, auto align clips based on waveform. And because they're already synced the first track, it just syncs those bottom ones. Let's unsolo that. Really easy way to drag and drop clips onto the timeline and sync them. Now that I've done this with the clips on the timeline as well, you might be saying, oh, but you can do this sort of thing when you make a multicam clip. You can, but sometimes you want a little bit more control. You want to go in and actually refine it whilst you're doing your syncing. So I've got a timeline here. I've done my sync. If I come up to my edit bin here, audio sync, this is my timeline. I can now, I can now convert timelines to multicam clips. An easy way for me to do that is right click, convert timeline to multicam clip. So I'm in my portrait timeline here as an example. In fact, I'll go to, rather than using a portrait timeline, I'll go back to my color features timeline, why not? And if I just drag and drop my multicam clip now down at the end, I could go into source viewer. Let's have a look here. There we go. Source viewer and multicam. And there we go. That timeline where I did all the sync, I've got a multicam clip for it right there. Really easy, really quickly. What else have we got on the edit page? We have, oh, this is a good one. In previous versions of Resolve, we had a tool called scene cut detection, which is still there. And the way that scene cut detection works is if I have a long clip like this, basically a rendered version of my timeline, and I want to bring it back into Resolve and edit it again. What I could do in previous versions was before I imported a clip, I could do this thing called scene cut detection, where Resolve automatically analyzes a clip and finds the cut points for me. Now, like I said, you had to do that before you even imported the clip in previous versions of Resolve. Well, you don't have to do that in Resolve 17. In Resolve 17, if I've imported, the long clip, whatever it is, I can just come up to timeline, detect scene cuts. Click on that. Resolve will play through the clip, it will analyze it. Again, I believe this is using the neural engine to do it. And then it just places cuts for us in that original clip. So if I play through here, where it's detected a change in scene, it's placed the cut for us. Same thing here, places those cuts automatically for us. Really quick, really easy stuff. And I never have to leave the edit page to do this type of stuff. Another really handy thing in the edit page, which I don't see get talked about a lot, is its ability now to support track mats. So what are track mats and how do we use them? Well, if I move this clip over a bit, you'll see we've got another shot of this lovely Aston Martin next to Concorde in a hangar here. Someone's gone to the hassle of actually making a mat of that for us. So they've actually basically rotoscoped around and made us a nice little mat. And we can now use this to isolate parts of our clip on the timeline. Again, previously, this is something you might have done in Fusion or in the color page, but we can do it straight from the edit page here. So if I duplicate my bottom clip on the timeline here, and I come over to composite modes in the inspector, you'll see we've got our normal composite modes that we've had in previous versions, but down at the bottom, we have all these different options. We have foreground alpha, luminance, inverted luminance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this top layer to foreground, and my track matte, I'm going to come down and I'm going to set to inverted luminance. So what have I done? Well, let's apply a blur. Let's apply a blur to this top clip. You'll see as I've done that, if I select this clip again and go over to effects in the top part of the inspector here, if I increase, do you know what, zoom in a little bit, if I increase the strength of that blur, you'll now see that I'm blurring everything but my masked area or my matte area. So doing this on the timeline makes it really easy for an editor, if you've got the track mattes, to go in and start doing some really quick sort of VFX. I'll probably dial that back a bit. And a really quick, cool way of showing off what else you can do with track mattes. It's not limited to just having, you know, yeah, it's great if we all get mattes for everything like this, but that doesn't always work, but we can use it quite creatively. And I'll show you a very quick way to do this here. So for anyone that's been to a theatre in the last, well, probably not recently, but before the lockdown, if anyone had been to a theatre, you've probably seen a certain genre of film. And without naming any specific names, I'm going to do the same thing I did here. I'm going to come down to my top layer. I'm going to set that as foreground. I've put a solid color at the bottom here. So a solid color generator that's just going to generate a black color. And I've put a title. So I'm going to use this title like we used this track matte. And in here, I told you without naming names, I'm just going to put superhero. I'm going to come across to settings. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to set this to luminance now. And what you'll see is, I'd say, pretty reminiscent of an opening title sequence that you might have seen, done really quickly, whoops, using track mattes within Resolve. So I'm basically using the text that I've put in there to create a matte where I'm cutting through to just see that top layer there. Again, it's probably not the best clip that we have in the world for this background. In fact, I could change the position of it. So you can actually see the car driving through in the background. You can see there. So there we go. Really quick, really easy to use stuff like track mattes to create creative transitions or titles or anything like that. We also have effects on the edit page that we didn't have in previous versions. So previously in Resolve, things like noise reduction was only available in the color page. Well, it's now a Resolve effect. So in my effects library, under Open Effects, we now have noise reduction. Again, this is a studio only feature, but I can just drag and drop that noise reduction effect onto a clip, and I've got all the same controls that I would have in the color page. If I zoom in, it's difficult to tell because this is, you know, it's a very old film scan that we have here. It looks quite noisy there, even with the noise reduction plugin turned on. But if I turn that on and off, you can see all this sort of dirt, this noise that's on there, how well that's sort of cleaned up from that clip. So that's the original. If I jump back, turn that on, you'll see the sort of job that it's done there. Again, not limited to just the noise reduction. If I come across here, we have a shot of a gentleman in a spacecraft with a clip underneath it that is a planet. We also have a 3D keyer plugin now as well. So the 3D keyer is the same 3D keyer that we have in the color page. If I drag and drop that onto my top clip, I get all the control parameters under the effects tab of the inspector. And if I change my viewer in the bottom left here to Open Effects Overlay, I can now just drag on the area that I want to key out, and straight away it's keyed out that green, revealing the clip underneath. If I want to get fancy with it, I can come over to the parameters in the inspector. I could use the clean black slider there. I might also tweak the in-out ratio. I could even do despill to sort of get rid of any sort of excess green in the shot there. And there you go. Really quick and easy keying without having to go to Fusion, without having to go to the color page either. The last effect that I'm going to show on the edit page is one called Video Collage. So again, I've come over to my Open Effects filters. I've just used the little search bar up here and I've typed in Video Collage. And I can just drag and drop that onto the top layer of this stack here. And what that does is it basically cuts out sections of the top layer, revealing the layers beneath it. And again, if I select that clip with the effect applied, come up to the Effects tab of the inspector, I can choose how many columns or rows I have. I'm going to take it down to one column, so one vertical column with 2 rows. I'm going to change the size of them, so I'm just going to reframe it a little bit like that, and I'll just push them off to the side over here. And because all it's doing is it's cutting through our top layer image to reveal the tracks below it, I can now zoom out and position these inside those windows that I've created. So if I just come along, change the zoom and then the XY parameters as well. There we go. Not too much. So that's that first clip. I'll select the bottom clip underneath that. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'll push it along here, drag down. And again, a little bit of tweaking. I'm doing this very quickly so we can sort of try and get through because there's still 2 pages to cover. So there we go. If I hit play now, you'll see we've got a nice, quick, easy video collage that we've done in there. The last sort of 2 bits on the edit page, Fusion and Fairlight, are very quick, so I'm hoping to get this done as quickly as I can. But the last 2 things that I'll mention on the edit page are mainly for performance improvements. So like I mentioned earlier, things that use the neural engine, so things like the Magic Mask or the Smart Reframe can be quite draining on system resources. So if, you know, in previous versions of Resolve, what we could do is we could use, we could use the render cache to sort of render things, and then if we made a change, it would have to re-render them. If we've applied an effect to a clip and we know we're not going to change that effect, I can right click on a clip and I can choose render in place. If I do that, Resolve then gives me a pop-up window where I can choose to, render a smaller, easier to read version of the file. Or I could render, massive EXR files if I wanted. But generally, if you want to render something so it's a little bit easier to play back, I can do that straight from the timeline there by just right-clicking, going to render in place, and then choosing the settings that I want to render it with. I can choose to include or exclude video effects. I can even include handles as well if I want to go in after the fact and render that. On top of that, Resolve now has the ability to create and link to external proxies. So if I let me just have a look here. If I want to render lower resolution versions of the files, I can do that pretty easily. I'll go to project settings, master settings, and in master settings, you'll see if I come down here to optimized media and render cache, we also have proxy media resolution and proxy media format. So on Windows, I have H.264 and I have some DNxHR options. If you're on Mac, I believe you have ProRes as well. And I can choose to, render lower resolution files. So half resolution, quarter resolution, eighth, all the way down to 1/16. Again, for faster playback. So if I wanted, say I'm working on 8K or 12K files from the new Ursa, I could choose to render 1/16 proxies in DNxHR LB. So they take up, very little space. They're really low resolution. It means I can edit on them quickly. I can, if I find this clip in the media pool here, I can't remember where I put it. It is in here somewhere. There we go. If I find a clip in the media pool, I can right click on it and generate proxy media. If I've already generated the proxy media and I'm moving between systems, I can link to that proxy media as well. So really handy to be able to do that. Okay, so that is a whistle-stop tour of some of the features of the edit page. Next to Fusion and Fairlight should be a little bit quicker. So jump into the Fusion page. The big change in the Fairlight page, big change in Fairlight is the new Flex bus architecture that they use. And what that means, well, in Resolve, in Fairlight, we have our audio tracks that then feed into buses. And our buses are what we generally mix down and render out when we're delivering our final file. The previous incarnation of the busing system within Fairlight was a little bit limiting. So if I created a bus and started, patching tracks into or assigning tracks to that bus, I couldn't then go in and change what format that bus was. So for example, let me switch over to, I have a Flex bus, there we go, Atmos Flex bus. I have a timeline for this. And you'll see I've got lots of tracks here. I've got 3 dialogue tracks, some room noise, I've got sound effects, and I've even got a little music bed and a drone sort of going in the background.
Are you sure?
Yes.
There we go. I have my my tracks set up here. I can actually drag out, I'll close the media pool. I'll drag out my track mixer here. I'll even close the inspector, so I've got a little bit more space. And if I come to Fairlight at the top, go to bus format, I will delete that because that's literally what I'm about to create. So right now I have a Dolby Atmos bed. So it's got 10 channels in it. All these 10 channels are being mixed down into this. But if I wanted to adjust just all the dialogue tracks together, I can create a separate bus, patch my dialogue tracks to that, and then I'll have a separate fader control or track mixer channel for that. So if I go to add bus, again, I'll do that again. So Fairlight bus format, add bus. I will call this dialogue. I hope I've spelled that correctly. And I'm going to make this stereo just as an example, because all of our dialogue tracks here are mono. I'm going to set it to stereo. And then I'm going to come to Fairlight again. Instead of bus format, I'm going to go to bus assign. And in here, you'll see along the top, I have my buses and I have my available tracks. So here we have our what are called our sends and our outs. With the new Fairlight FlexBus architecture, we no longer reference auxiliary track or auxiliary buses. They are now the send buses. But what I'm looking for is these outs here. So bed 1, which is my Atmos bed, and then my B2 dialogue, which is my dialogue bus that I just created. So if I select B2, and I just select my dialogue tracks, which are my first 3, so DX, Emiliana, Philip, and Ada, you'll see straight away it's put which buses they're on. So B10, so bus 1 out, and B20, bus 2 out. That's all I have to do. I can hit close now. On the channel strips on the mixer, you'll see here bus outputs. So the first tracks, or all of the tracks, are feeding into my Atmos bed bus, but all these first 3 are also feeding into my dialogue bus as well. Now, if I come over to the end here, you might be like, well, where is your dialogue bus? A little bit annoying, but every time you make a new bus in Fairlight, you've got to scale out your mixer a little bit. And that's what I've got down here. I've now got my dialogue bus down the end. So if I actually, how do I want to do that? Oh, that was it. So up here underneath the viewer, I can actually choose which bus I'm monitoring. So right now I'm monitoring my bed bus here. So all of my tracks feed into my Atmos bed, and that's what I'm monitoring. If I wanted to just monitor my dialogue bus, I change that over.
Philip Maida.
Identify the person on the med lab.
I now have just that bus feeding to my my speakers or my headphones in this case. And I talked earlier about the flexibility, and I made reference to the fact that I'm making a stereo bus even though my tracks are mono. And that's to show off the flexibility that I talked about. So if I now come back to Fairlight, bus format, you'll see all my options are still here. I can just change that back to mono, hit OK, and straight away it updates to be a mono track. So really simple, really easy to do type stuff. If I, and it isn't just limited to, feeding tracks into buses. We can also feed buses into buses as well. I've never said buses this much in my life. So let's show this off. So I've got a fader control here where
how is that possible?
If I go back to the beginning, I've got a fader control here where I can control just my dialogue if I wanted. What if I wanted to add, a separate bus that I apply effects onto my dialogue track with? Well, let's do the same thing. We'll go to Fairlight, bus format. I'm going to make a new bus. I'm going to call this dialogue underscore FX. Keep it as mono and hit OK. Again, if I scale out, you'll see I now have my dialogue FX bus here. And I could take my dialogue bus and now feed it into dialogue FX. So if I just want to start applying effects separately from controlling, different parameters for all of my dialogue, that's fine. I can do that. And again, I could go to Fairlight bus assign, or I could use this bus outputs header here on the channel strip. So if I come along to the dialogue bus here, click on the plus under the bus outputs column, or row, sorry, and choose dialogue FX. This bus now feeds into my dialogue FX bus, and I could go in and I could apply, I don't know, let's go to apply an echo. Why not? So I've applied an echo to that bus. If I want to just monitor my dialogue effects bus, I'll change that up here, hit play.
Amelia Newton.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
There we go. I've created a separate bus where I can apply effects and control them all separately from my control of the dialogue tracks or from the whole mix under that, that bed as well. So a really good sort of description I heard of when thinking of buses and routing and patching tracks around, because it's not always the most intuitive thing, is if you think of water flowing through pipes. So we have several pipes with water flowing through them, and we can have bits that break off, join together, and the water just keeps flowing through. That's our audio. Our audio is the water. It's just flowing through these pipes, and we're just breaking little bits off, taking it different places, almost like branches on a tree, except we're joining them all back up again at the end. Hopefully that's not confused too many people there. Last bit for the Fairlight page really is a quick mention of Dolby Atmos. I mentioned there we have a Dolby Atmos bed. So Dolby Atmos is slightly different to traditional surround sound where you have, a 2.1, 5.1, 7.1 setup where you have, the first digit is your sort of head level speakers. So, in a 5.1, you have sort of 5 sort of speakers around the room, generally at head level, and 1 subwoofer. Dolby Atmos also accounts for height as well. So you end up with, if I come to bus format, you'll see this Dolby Atmos here is 7.1.2. So that's that third one, those height dimension speakers. And we have Dolby Atmos controls within Resolve now. So if I come to DaVinci Resolve, preferences, again, control comma or command comma on a Mac, and I want to go to video and audio I/O. Now, in previous versions of Resolve 17, these options were in the project settings. So if you're using, one of the early versions of 17, you'll find these under the project settings Fairlight. But it has moved. So in the latest version, so I think I'm on 17.3 or 0.3.1, what you're looking at is the preferences, video and audio I/O, and I can choose to enable Dolby Atmos there. And once I've done that, I now have access to a few additional Dolby Atmos controls. So if I come up to Fairlight, Immersive Audio, you'll see I have a space view scope. And what this does is if I hit play,
Yes.
it shows me where all of my audio sources are in a 3D space.
I'm speaking with.
Philip Maida.
So I could, you can get really into this. You can position, tracks, sounds, wherever you want in that 3D space. We can also export and import Dolby Atmos tracks from the Fairlight page if we're wanting to, render out and deliver them, or bring them in and edit them after the fact. And the way that we do that is, again, Fairlight, immersive audio, we can import or export a master file. So if I export master file, it's going out with a timeline name, so it's going to be Atmos FlexBus, and I can choose to do it as a broadcast wave or an IMF. I'll just leave it as BWF at the moment. Hit export. I'll do this to my desktop. Why not? Hit save. Generated. I have to. There you go. I have to set a range. So I'll just set a range in there. Fairlight, immersive audio, export master file. Leave the settings as they are. Let's go into my desktop. Hit save. Resolve will render that out. Now, if I open a file viewer and go to my desktop, I should have, there we go, the Atmos FlexBus wave file. And I could re-import that. So if I think I have another timeline set up for this, Dolby Atmos, there we go. Fairlight, immersive audio, import master file, select my Atmos FlexBus there, hit open. Resolve just makes you a new timeline so you can copy across video tracks and all these sorts of things. But you'll see, along with it, I have my FlexBus, my Atmos bed that I had in my previous timeline. So if I go back to the FlexBus, you'll see the bed bus that I had set up. If I go, choosing the wrong timeline. It is timeline 8, it's been called. There we go. You'll see that that's been imported along with all the tracks there as well. So again, very quick tour of Dolby Atmos. Dolby Atmos is an interesting one. You can get lost in that quite easily. We're just showing off some of the new things that have been added for 17, so that people that might not know they're there exist, or people that want to go up and sort of learn a bit more about them can do that as well. And we're into the home stretch now. So Fusion page. Not too much has changed in the Fusion page, but there has been, in fact, jump to the edit page and select my Fusion timeline there. There we go. But one of the nice things that has been added is if I open my keyframe editor, you'll now see that in the keyframe editor, underneath my media in node, so the nodes that I use to load media into the Fusion page, if I just hit play, you'll see that in the keyframe editor, I now have a representation of the audio waveform. So it's not uncommon to want to time things to the audio track. Previously, there was no way of doing that precisely within Fusion at all. But now the keyframe editor shows us the waveform in here as well. And I can zoom in on that if I want to get very sort of fine, precise control. Say I want to, time. I've added a gunshot sound effect. Why not? I want to time the muzzle flash and the reaction and all that sort of, those sorts of effects to that sound effect. I can see it there on my in my keyframe editor. The last thing that I'm going to show in this, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that, to get me to shut up a little bit, is to do with what's called the animation curves. So previously in Resolve, if I applied an animation to a template, say I've made a text template here, and I had an animation where it started off dark and the light pulled out from it to reveal the title, which in this case is Hyperlight. If I then went in and trimmed my clip, the animation didn't scale with it. So if I trimmed the beginning of my clip or the end of my clip, it would just trim off the beginning and the end of the animation. So it would start partway through and finish partway through the animation. That's been changed now with what are called animation curves. So if I select my spotlight here and I come across to the transform controls, right now it's the Z axis, so how far away my light is, my spotlight is from my text, was set at 4 there. I could set it, closer or further away, depending on what I want to do. Just set it to 4 just now because that's where I like it. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this specific slider. So I can right click on the slider or just next to the slider. And I'm going to go to modify with, and the first option, anim curves or animation curves. If I click on that, it's done something, but what's it done? Well, it's added a keyframe. We can tell that by the keyframe, the auto keyframe indicator highlighting orange. And now if I play through the clip, we can see that it starts with the Z axis here, or the Z control here at 0, and it finishes with it on 10. That's not what I wanted, but it's done something. So if I look in my inspector here, at the top I'm in the Tools tab. If I come across to modifiers now, because that's what I've done, I modified that parameter with the animation curve. So I go across to the modifiers, you can see here, animation curves on Spotlight 1 on the Z offset control. And you'll see here, we've got transition, we've got the source. So transition, duration, or custom. I'm going to set this to duration. I want it to be the duration of the clip. And it's set the scale here to 10. And previously the scale was set to 4. So if I set that to 4 and hit enter, now as I play through, it should scale out. So it starts at 0 and it reaches 4 by the end of the clip, which is great. But what if I wanted, it's kind of annoying that it ends, the animation ends right as the clip ends. So I might move my playhead forward a bit. I'll put it on frame 175. And I can now use this time scale slider here to increase the speed of that effect or decrease it. So it'll take longer to complete or less time to complete. So I'm going to set that around 1.3-ish now. So as it gets to roughly that 175 mark, it should have completed the animation process there. Let's just double check. I'll place my mouse around here. Yep, roughly it's finished it by then. If I come across to the edit page now, and I position just about there, you'll see it finishes again with a few frames left. If I was now to trim that clip, there we go, we can still see, or it should now scale, so it finishes with a few frames left at the end there as well. So it has gone through. In fact, what I'll do is I'll turn the render cache off as well. I'll delete that just to be safe. There we go. So now as we get towards the end of the clip, it should scale that animation along with the text as well, just by using those animation curves. So that was a very, very quick tour of DaVinci Resolve, or the key features of DaVinci Resolve 17. I realize that's gone on quite a bit. It's been about an hour and a half of talking through that. So I really appreciate your time and your patience with that as well. Hopefully that's shown you, some of the features that you might already know about in Resolve, you might already be using, or if you haven't upgraded to Resolve yet, you might be like me, a bit quite slow to upgrade if you're in the middle of a project. I've only recently gone to 17.3 because I was waiting for a few projects to finish. So you might, be waiting around, or you might just be curious about what 17 actually offers. Hopefully that clears it up a little bit. It shows you what you can now do in Resolve, which is just this tool that keeps on growing and growing and absolutely amazes me at times with what it can do. And yeah, I hope you found that helpful. I'll open this up to questions now. So if you've got any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Got a question here. Very helpful. I missed the start of the recording, or can I see a recording of this somewhere? Yes. So we're recording this session, and it is going to go on our YouTube channel within the coming sort of week or so. So what we'll do once we finish the session here today, we'll hand this off to our studio team, who will polish it up a little bit for us, and then throw it on the YouTube channel for you to go through at your own pace as well. So if you search Scan Pro Video on YouTube, it should be up there in the next week or two, I would say. Are Neural Engine features studio only? I believe so. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure if there are any Neural Engine features that are in the free version. I don't think there are. So things like, in fact, Smart Reframe. I think Smart Reframe is in the free version. I'm not actually 100% sure on that off the top of my head. I think Smart Reframe is in the free version. I'd need to double check, but Magic Mask definitely is a studio feature only. Auto Scene Detect, that's now in the edit page as well. So where I showed that earlier, where I had one long clip with several scenes in it, that should be on the free version as well. But I need to double check on those. If you message me your email address, I will look into that and get back to you. But I think it might be a tool dependent thing rather than depending on whether it uses the Neural Engine or not. I'm not seeing any more questions come through at the moment, so I'm hoping, well, there's two options. I've either bored everyone to sleep or I've answered quite a lot of your questions off the bat. Hopefully it's the second one. But if you do have any other questions, feel free to email us or email the Scan Pro Video team. What I'll do is I'll actually put in the email address. So scanprovideo@scan.co.uk. And I've just put that in the chat there for everyone. Make a note of that. If any questions do come up around, Resolve, around licenses or anything like that, if you want to see more content like this from us, we have been doing this webinar series sort of every second Thursday of the month. I'm not sure that we have any more lined up, but if there is content you want to see us make around Resolve or any of the products that we sell, drop us an email, get in contact. We'd love to do that. And we always love hearing from you guys around what you want and how you're using all of your kit as well. So feel free to contact us and we'll do everything we can to help you. So with that said, the last thing really for me to say again is thank you for everyone for attending. I hope that has been helpful. I know it's been a bit of a long slog to sit through on a Zoom meeting, but I hope it has been worthwhile. And I hope you all have fantastic ends to your week and a fantastic weekend as well. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on any of the products and solutions mentioned in this webinar, contact the Pro Video team today. And you can also shop our Blackmagic design range at Scan Pro Video. If you haven't checked out our other sessions yet, then head over to the Pro Video YouTube channel and search Blackmagic Design Webinars. Thanks for watching.